That's so beautiful, that song and the words. And when you're hearing it, don't you just kind of feel like, well, of course. Now that you mention it, I can let go. I don't need to know stuff. Well, that song is perfectly in line with our theme for this month, which is think outside the box. Think outside the box. See, we can get enmeshed in that inside-the-box thinking because it's a predictable, familiar, habitual, routine place where we know stuff, or we think we know stuff. It's that place where actually we feel like we pretty much got it all figured out inside the box. Thinking outside the box takes us to unfamiliar territory. And that can be very disturbing. It can be very disturbing if we're still hanging on to that inside-the-box way of assuming that we need to know everything. We need to be able to predict everything. Then if we're thinking that way, getting outside that box is extremely, extremely nerve-wracking and upsetting. So as I told those of you who were here last Sunday, I want to remind you why this idea came to me for this month. I was at a ministers' meeting in Orlando a few weeks ago, and one of the ministers happened to share this as she was speaking. And she was talking about Raymond Charles Barker, who was an early New Thought teacher. He lived until about the 1980s, and he was powerful. He was succinct. He was no nonsense, and he knew this teaching. He knew that it's always about what's my consciousness, where's my consciousness. Don't be blaming the effects and the stuff outside. Well, he even he would have times when he was feeling confused, frustrated, facing a problem. And here's what he would do. He would sit himself down in his chair, and he would firmly and loudly declare, "Barker, you just need a bigger idea." That was it. Not ruminating, not analyzing, not trying to struggle and figure things out, not messing with the situation. He just reminded himself that in order to navigate and move through it and transcend it, he needed a bigger idea. And when we say you need a bigger idea, doesn't mean stare at that problem, that challenge, that situation, and get a bigger idea of the problem, which is kind of where we're tempted to go. It means get a bigger idea by thinking outside the little box where all the limiting ideas are. This is so significant because it's a core principle of what we teach. And one of our longtime wise ministers of Centers for Spiritual Living was quoted in Science of Mind magazine this month, Margaret Stortz. And she said, very simply, there is nothing that happens in the physical world that's not preceded by an idea. Nothing. Nothing that happens in the physical world that is not preceded by an idea. So you can understand then why Barker would say, well, when I'm looking at things in my outer world and they're not going so well, where I need to go is not there, but I need to go to a bigger idea. And so we're taking that idea, that concept, and thinking outside the box this month. And outside the box today, we're going to be exploring that vast, vast field of the unknown that generally when I think of, and maybe you do too, when you think of going outside the box, it's like that's the area of the unknown. I haven't been there. And we're also, when we're going outside the box, let's remember it's not just a vast field of sometimes scary unknown things. You know, fear of the unknown, very, very common. We all say, oh, I know that. I know what that is. It's also a vast field of possibilities, of bigger ideas. So this month, I'm inviting you to join me in pushing the envelope, pushing the edges of the box, and think outside that box. So for starters, last Sunday, I talked about unplugging from the box, just totally unplugging. You can hear about that if you would like to go to our website, and there's a podcast there for free that you can get caught up with our series on there and learn about unplugging from the box. So here we are now. We're outside the box. We're unplugged. Let's explore. What is that territory like out there in that vast unknown? Well, I found something that came across my desk this week, tells it really, really well, and it's called The Parable of the Trapeze, and it's written by a man named Danon Perry. And here's the subtitle of it. He said, it is about turning the fear of transformation into the transformation of fear. It's about turning the fear of transformation. Let's face it, I'm talking about, again, transformation occurs outside the box. We're generally a little fearful. And he's saying, this is not going to be about getting rid of that fear. It's going to be about transforming it. Now, here's how he says it. See if you can relate. Sometimes I feel that my life is a series of trapeze swings. I'm either hanging on to a trapeze bar, swinging along, or for a few moments in my life, I'm hurtling across space in between trapeze bars. Most of the time, I'm hanging on for dear life to my trapeze bar of the moment. It carries me along, and I have the feeling I'm in control of my life. Yes? Admit? I admit. But every once in a while, he says, as I'm merrily swinging along, I look out ahead of me into the distance, and what do I see? Another trapeze bar swinging toward me. And I know in that place inside me that knows, you know that place, I know that this new trapeze bar has my name on it. It's my next step, my growth, my greater aliveness coming to get me. He says, in my heart of hearts, I know that for me to grow, I must release my grip on the current familiar bar and move to the new one. Can you relate? He says, I must unplug, let go. Mixing our metaphors a little bit here, but you get the idea. It's about letting go of that secure trapeze bar. So he says, each time this happens, I am filled with terror. It doesn't matter that all the previous times that I've hurtled across the void of unknowing, I've always made it. Each time I'm terrified that I will miss, that I'll be crushed on unseen rocks in the bottomless chasm between the bars. But I do it anyway. And for an eternity that can last a microsecond or 1,000 lifetimes, I soar across the dark void of the past is gone, the future is not yet here. There is a space in between that. The past is gone, the future's not here. And it's that space. He said, is this void between trapeze bars just a scary, confusing, disorienting nowhere that I must get through as fast and as unconsciously as I can? It's tempting, he says, and it is, isn't it? We want to go from, okay, this is ending, but I want to get started on the new thing right away. I don't want to hang out in the middle. But he says, no. What a wasted opportunity that would be. He said, I have a sneaking suspicion that the transition zone between the bars is the only real thing, and that the bars are just illusions we dream up to avoid that void, that outside-the-box place where real growth and real transformation takes place. He says, whether or not my hunch is true, it remains that in these transition zones, our lives are incredibly rich. And so these places, he says, should be honored and they should be savored. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Not all the time. It doesn't feel that way anyway. But he has a point. He continues, he says, yes, with all the pain and the fear and the feelings of being out of control. I don't need to know, you know what I mean? Out of control. And not knowing which can, and he says not necessarily, but which can accompany these transitions, they are still the most alive, most growth-filled, most passionate, expansive moments of our lives. So he says, transformation of fear, then, has nothing to do with making the fear go away, but rather with giving ourselves permission to hang out in that transition space between trapezes. Nothing to do with making the fear go away, but rather with giving ourselves permission to hang out in the transition place between trapezes. And hurtling through the void, we just may learn how to fly. Have you ever been there? Have you ever, and you found, you really did. You transcended, you transformed, you flew. That's why we're singing that song as our opener every week, Let Go, Let God, Let the Good Times Roll. That's code for let go of the trapeze and fly. And you know, this could happen several times a day. It isn't just like one big event in our lives. We've had those too, no question. So these can be big events or small events. The process is the same. There's that in-between space. And that space is where we discover the bigger idea for whatever we're facing. It's in that space. Let's not rush too quickly to grab onto what we think is the next thing we need to do. In that space of the unknown, in between the trapezes, in between what was and what will be, is where the big ideas start to germinate and start to show up. And by the way, it may not come as a big singular idea. It may come as increments, bits and pieces. But that's where it starts to show up. There's another way of describing this space, and it's a new word that came to my attention this week from an author named Karen Hume, and it's called liminal space. Liminal space. And she says this is where the magic begins. This is where real creativity happens. This is where new opportunities and solutions appear. And liminal space, the Latin root for that word means threshold. So now, okay, yeah, I get that. That place in between of I don't know, I'm letting go, is a threshold from what was, what will be. And so we experience that liminal space whenever we're going through changes. Let me see, I'm not going to take a poll, but let me see. How many have gone through the change of getting married, getting divorced? True confession time. You can line forms to the right, left. How about job, career, end, job, career, beginning, or changing in some way, the death of a loved one. You know, we've all gone through so many of those changes. That's where we experience that liminal space in between if we pay attention. It's where betwixt and between. It's where we've left what was, but we haven't yet inhabited what's next. It's the space between no longer and not yet. And you may be in one of those situations right now. You may be in that space now. I'll bet we all are if we pay attention, because our lives are always about change, always. So it might be a tiny little thing. But I invite you to take this idea now with it, whatever change your plans for the week, whatever it might be, and pay attention to that liminal space, the threshold, the in-between, what you once were, and more importantly, who you are becoming. Who you are becoming. In this space, it isn't the situation that changes so much, but if we're paying attention, it's we who change, and that's really the important thing. I mean, otherwise, if we drag along the same old way of doing things into the new situation, anybody noticed? Situation repeats itself. Different outfits, different people, different geography, but the same story. So when we pay attention in this in-between place, we realize we change. I like what Joseph Campbell said. We must be willing to let go of the life we planned so that we can accept the life that is waiting for us. Oh, but wait, I've got a 5-year plan. Just a minute, I'll get back to you in 5 years. It's like what the butterfly said to the caterpillar. You can fly, but the cocoon has to go. So that is transformation from who you think you are inside that box to your next greater expression of who you can be. And that's what we teach in Science of Mind and New Thought all the time, is that we're always, our journey of life never ends, this unfolding never ends, this next expression of who we're intended to be, how we're intended to be more fulfilled, and how we're intended then to share that with the world. So this happens many, many times in our lives. So let's just think about some ways to handle this in-between space. And one of the best ways, I think, is questions. To explore and discover all that waits for us outside the box is not by demanding answers, because that's kind of in the box thinking again, isn't it? But it's by asking different questions and then being willing to, as the poet Rilke said, to love the questions, to live the questions. And perhaps, the poet says, perhaps one day you will live along one day into the answers. That almost seems like, well, wait a minute, how does that work? You don't have to know that. You don't have to know that. What we have to know is, I'm happy and content right now to be in the question. Dr. Ernest Holmes, the architect of our philosophy, said this about the power and the wisdom of questions. I love this because it again, it's a whole different look at whatever the problem du jour, the trapeze du jour. He said, every problem contains its own answer if you think of the problem as merely a question, an inquiry, rather than as an obstruction. Don't we typically encounter some problem, something that seems insurmountable, and we say, something's in my way? And he suggests that we approach it as a question, an inquiry, and that there is an answer in there. Okay, so outside the box, hanging out there in that liminal space, how about this? Just be curious. Just be curious. Be willing to experiment with some new ideas. Be willing to try on some brand new perspectives. Be willing to ask, I wonder what's next, rather than demanding, I have to know what's next. I wonder what's next. How about just, what if? What if? How about, I love this question, what wants to happen? What wants to happen? Very interesting thing occurs when you ask that question and just sit with it for a while. Because it doesn't feel forced. It's not what needs to happen, it's what wants to happen. Another really beautiful question is, what is mine to do right now, in this moment? What is mine to do? Not what do I need other people to do, not what do I need in order so I can do something. It's what is mine to do right now, and there always is an answer. It may be a very small thing. It may be mine to do right now is to be still, to rest, to be in the quiet, to take a step back. One of my favorite authors is Tama Keeves, and she wrote, her most recent book is called Thriving Through Uncertainty, and Lord knows, outside the box and in between the trapezes, whichever way we want to look at this, it's uncertain, isn't it? And she talks all about thriving in that space. And she says, ditch the notion that you need to figure out what you will do with the rest of your life, or even the rest of your day, or the rest of your year. What do you want to be? What do you want to do in this moment, because Spirit speaks in the now. It doesn't speak about the future. Spirit is always fully present in the now. She goes on to say, your answer is almost never where you're looking. In fact, I'll suggest while you're outside the box, try this. Think less, feel more. Think less, feel more. And then ask, what is my heart telling me? See, our error is often that we are looking with our mind for answers that are in our heart. And that gets in the way. Stop figuring it out and let it out. Stop figuring it out and let it out. Surprise me. How about that? When you're in that in-between space and you're open, saying, as Carlton's saying so beautifully, I don't need to know, surprise me. And then be ready for some surprises. Tama Keeves again, in writing about the importance of our heart knows where our mind gets in the way, she said, it's only your mind that wants to label and file things away like a testy librarian who's aggravated at a sequence that he doesn't recognize. Isn't that true? Our mind is saying, well, now, where does this fit and how does this happen? And that's all useful. But it's not the GPS that we really, really need for our lives. Another way to tap into the beautiful guidance that's there while you're hanging out outside the box or between the trapezes. Forget answers and uncover desires. Forget looking for answers and instead uncover desires, because you know what? Your desires are doorways to something. They may look clunky, they may look like, wait a minute, that I don't quite get that, but they'll develop. They'll expand. They're telling you something. So instead of grabbing for the answers, listen for the desires. What are your desires? And listen. Really listen. And that means when you suddenly become aware of, oh, that's a desire coming up. That's something my heart is telling me. Listening does not include then evaluating, fixing, planning, judging yourself. In fact, you can't really listen to self-judgment and also guidance at the same time. Have you noticed that? Pay attention to that. The guidance comes up and immediately there's something in the head that says, I'm not good enough, I don't have enough, I don't know how to figure it out. I'm judging myself. And my guidance says, oh, never mind. Do it your own way. Listen. Listen to the ideas that come to what your heart is telling you. And here's another question to ask. What do I love? What do I love? It's another way of asking what do I desire? What is mine to do right now? What do I love? So Tama Keeves writes about this in her book. And she says she has many coaching clients, and she'll tell them that, and they'll say, I've asked that 1,000,000 times, and I'm not getting the answer I want. And she says, well, no. Here's what I think you've asked. You've asked, what do I love to do that makes money, yet, better yet, buckets of money? Or, what do I love to do that won't make me have to go back to school? Or, what do I love that my spouse or parents or kids or my coworkers won't roll their eyes at? See, that's not staying with what do I love, period, right now. That may change. It's all about right now. And she said it very well. She said, your heart will often lead you off the grid, out of the box, into a clarity that is way beyond labels. Yeah, haven't you ever had that happen where you just know you're clear as can be and yet you cannot label it? You've got it. We've got it. We've got it, all of us. And it's such a beautiful thing. It's just a matter of learning to trust it. Learning to trust it. Like in the song that Carlton said, I find I'm crying out for answers. I guess I'm still craving control. And still I find myself afraid of taking chances. But at the moment I remember, it comes so clear to me that the minute I surrender outside the box, I'm as safe as I can be. I'm as safe as I can be. That's why I don't need to know. So this is going to be continued. Next week we have our wonderful guest speaker who is Reverend Emile Gavreau, and he's going to talk about your infinite possibilities, which can't get much further outside the box than that. And then the following week we'll talk about creating outside the box, and then finally we'll wrap it up with living outside the box. And so, meanwhile, this week I would like you to remember that what we sang in that chant, that God is holding you. And especially remember that when you're in that don't know space, in that, they said I don't need to know, but I'm feeling wobbly and kind of uncertain. Remember these words of Dr. Ernest Holmes. I don't know what to do, but something in me does know. I don't know what to do, but something in me does know. And you'll find that'll stand by you. And you'll find that as Carlton sings for us now, walking with the Spirit, that's what that means. Knowing, I don't need to know, but something in me does. I'm walking with the Spirit. So have a great week outside the box. Namaste. Thank you.